I thought intimacy was every time I touched my wife, it had to lead to, and that's just my immaturity.
Yeah.
That's just my immaturity. That's me having to work through my stuff. That's my lack of self-awareness. And that caused problems in our marriage.
And lack of communication around it. Right. So the assumptions.
There you go.
The assumption then led to, oh, this is what's going to happen. No, like you never asked me.
Yeah.
Like
you thought that back rub was for free?
Yeah.
Yep, I know, right?
What's up, fam? Welcome back to the W Podcast. We are so excited. My name is Tim. This is my beautiful wife, Pauline. You are tuning in to another episode of the W Podcast where you get wisdom in the word with the Hey. So we are so excited. We have some special guests that are joining us on the podcast today. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, we have Scott and Emily Holden joining us this week. They are the founders of the Project Roots and Wings organization. They are super passionate about helping people build a foundation of godly marriages and healthy marriages and relationships. So if you are in that time of your life, or if you want to be one day, they're going to be such a blessing to you. We're so excited to have them and share a little bit about their story today.
Absolutely. So let's bring them on. Scott, Emily, what's up, fam?
Hey guys, how are you?
We're good. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
The kids are down. We're
Yes.
good.
Yes, that's a win.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you all on. We've known you for years now. Like, I don't even know exactly how many years, but we've known you all for years, and you've been such a blessing to our relationship. So we're so excited for the world to be able to be blessed by your relationship. And not only us, like Pauline said, there's been so many other people that you've been able to impact through your organization and just through your life.
Yeah, and through your podcast as well. So we're excited for y'all to come jump on to ours and share the wisdom. If they sound like professionals, it's because they are. So
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I want to start here because you all know this podcast, primarily what we talk about is dating.
Yeah.
And we love being able to focus on dating because so often in the church, they get forgotten about.
Yeah.
It's heavy on the singles, it's heavy on marriage, but not so much dating. But before you start dating somebody, you have to be single. And we know that a lot of the people who follow our podcast, listen to our podcast, they are in that stage where they're single right now. They don't have anybody that they're talking to. And some may be discouraged. Some may be glad about that. So we just kind of want to go back and let people kind of sneak into your world when you both were single. Scott or Emily, you all can choose who goes first. But we would love to just take us back to when you were single. What was your mindset? What was your favorite part of being single? Did you hate it?
yeah, what was life looking like for you all?
Let us know.
Whew, man, I tell you, well, you're going to bring us back away.
This is like pre-internet.
Yeah. We had indoor plumbing then, but seriously, I've been with Emily for 20 years. We've been married for 17.
Respect.
Thank you. And it was interesting when you guys gave us the kind of the pre-questions ahead of time, and I looked at that and I was just like, I had to think for a minute because it's been a while. When I think about singleness and what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, I think I just be very honest, I was really pretty immature. And that kind of hindered my ability to enter into singleness with some self-awareness. And I think for me, as I look back, that limited self-awareness really handicapped me because I didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
So anybody I dated, I kind of was like a chameleon,
Wow.
to be honest. And I would kind of take on who I thought they wanted me to be. And what that ended up doing was when I finally did meet Emily, I kind of came into our relationship with that baggage.
Yeah.
And the problem was I didn't even know I had it. So I would act in certain ways and it would create problems for us. And it wasn't until we were deeper into the relationship, like 6, 7 months, 8 months, a year, whatever, where I started to notice like, wait a minute, that's not who I am.
Mhm.
She was really good at kind of calling me out, like, what's going on? What are you doing? Um, and that just kind of brought an awareness to me that if I could say this, I'm going to change the question a little bit. If I could do something different in dating, it would be, I would raise my level of self-awareness
Yeah.
before I
That's so
would
good.
ever enter into a relationship. Emily was helpful because she raised my self-awareness because of who she was. So I hope that answers the question a little bit for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Emily?
So I have to go way back because honestly, this is a really good question. In reflecting on my dating relationship prior to Scott, was literally dating someone for years, like from relationship to relationship to relationship. So for me to go back to singleness, it was high school and like probably sophomore year of high school. So that was a long time before that. So obviously two things. A little bit of what Scott just said in terms of, knowing yourself. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a chameleon from relationship to relationship, but I would say that I had people pleasing tendencies.
Mm.
And so it was very easy for me because I wasn't comfortable with who I was
Mhm.
to then only focus on the other person and focus on their needs and
Mhm.
all of those other things. So kind of going back to like what Scott said, if I could go back and tell, or even tell my sons, right? So,
There you
our
go.
sons are 10 and 4, they have a while before they're going to date, but it's going to go fast.
It is,
I
yeah.
mean, like, my biggest advice would be just learn who you are and get comfortable in who you are before you're jumping into a relationship. Because it's not that you can't discover who you are, but it just makes it more difficult. And there are positives because, like Scott said, you can sharpen each other and refine each other, but sometimes it takes a little longer if you don't know who you are to begin with.
That's good. Emily, I never knew you were one of these people that you've been dating somebody since like the 4th grade.
I can tell you, boyfriend from 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th. That's my journey.
That's thank you for sharing that. So something I want to piggyback on, Scott, you said it, Emily, you said it different ways, but you talked about self-awareness. So you talked about knowing yourself. I can see somebody listening or watching right now and they're like, how do I do that? Like, what would you tell somebody that's trying to figure out how to get to know themselves?
Their self-awareness, yeah.
Whew, man. I think that the not so glamorous answer is spend a lot of time with yourself. And in that sense, to add a little context to that, what are your values? Where do you see yourself in a year, 3 years, 5 years? Because that 5-year out person, that 5-year out Scott is different than the Scott of today. And so by raising self-awareness to say, I don't want to be the same person today that I am 5 years from now, that's going to take some introspection.
Yeah.
And I think we're biased as a culture. I think, and I'll use that as in the broadest sense. I think church, broadest culture of the church, broadest culture of just society in general, we are biased against introspection, to the point of we numb ourselves by electronics. We're guilty of this.
Yeah.
We always have our smartphone with us. We always have a computer. We always have our iPad, or maybe we're playing video games, and all of those things are great. It's when those things substitute for getting to know yourself by spending time alone, like prayer and meditation. Meditating on God's word is really important for us in raising our self-awareness. Prayer, and then I think the next layer down is community. Surrounding yourself with people who aren't like you, who are stronger than you, faster than you, better than you, smarter than you, who then challenge you in your assumptions of the world and your assumptions of life and your assumptions even of yourself. Because when somebody comes up to you and says, man, you're a really great guy, and you deny that, faced with either they're lying and I'm right, or I'm lying and I can't accept their truth. And what that does is, once again, without becoming just introspective to the negative side, it helps me to look inside and say, why can't I accept someone's compliment? What is that? And maybe then it's therapy. So maybe that's a third layer down.
Stealing all my stuff.
Seeking therapy.
I'm like, ooh, he didn't say therapy.
And I'll let her jump in, because she does have.
It's a handoff.
And the handoff. There we go.
I'm just kidding. Like, honestly, I was like, oh, he's not going to talk about community, and then he did. And therapy. I don't know that I have much more to add outside of like. Sometimes you need a professional help in order to be able to dig through some stuff that could have been, from childhood or environment or whatever the case may be. And that can be a very safe place. They, especially like professionals, will give you great homework to really dig. And that's where your quiet time and meditating and all of those things can come into play as well. But it's really interesting because I've been doing a lot of reflection. And we actually just got challenged this past week from our pastor to like draw a timeline of major life events. And I think that that's another place where you can get to know yourself, is if you take that time and, again, draw a timeline, look at where God intervened or whatever people believe, like some moment that was impactful. And I think if you go back in that remembrance, there is something about your authentic self as well in those moments. And so that, I also believe, kind of tells you a little bit about, who am I?
Yeah, that's so good. Because what I heard between the both of you, Scott really talked about what stood out to me was you calling out, like, think about your future self. Where do you want to be? Because if we're healthy people, we want to grow and we want to get better. And I just had this kind of like picture in my mind, Scott, when you were talking about like an athlete and training, and like, when you're an athlete, I like to consider myself athletic, but Emily can talk to us all about training for top athletes, and she's a volleyball coach and player and all that stuff. But I just think about, like, if you're a top athlete, you want to get better. Your goal is not to stay, I want to be a varsity, volleyball player for the rest of my life. No, you want to play college, you want to play professional. You're trying to, if you're dedicated, of course, like you want to constantly move forward. So you are investing into your future self. Like, hey, I am training this hard as a freshman because I want to play D1 in 4 years. But I think when it comes to our relationships, like so many times, especially in our culture, like millennials and Gen Z, like a lot of times in our current generations, we're thinking like, can I trust you to be the same person that I say yes to on the wedding day? And it's like, that person is not going to be the same person. Yeah. Hopefully they'll be better, of course.
Yeah.
But also, and hopefully you'll be better, but also I think so many times people are like kind of shying away from marriage, for a lot of reasons. But I think one of those is like, well, I don't know if I can commit to what I don't know, instead of being, hopeful. And also I think the dating phase, a lot of times people do not communicate enough that like, hey, I am trying to get here in 5 years. This is where I want to be. So you can't get excited about partnering with that, with that person, because they don't know where they're going. Because this goes back to the self-awareness piece. And even Emily, you were kind of talking about the other side of that, which is like looking backwards and like, okay, if I want to get to know myself, what type of decisions did I make? Why did I make those decisions? Instead of just like, oh, it's something I did, and even you all starting off saying like, oh, well, I was a people pleaser, I was a chameleon. And I know that you all have done work to even recognize that, because a lot of people will just say, oh, I just did that because that's what everybody else around me did, or that's what I felt I was supposed to do, instead of realizing there's something inside me, that was broken. So I think that that's so key, kind of having that perspective of looking forward, and then also looking backwards, even going as far back to like before you gave your life to Christ, if you are a Christian, because that was you, like it was still you, and you're still dying every day.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not, you cannot, I think we kind of get into this whole, like, oh, well, that was the old me. And it's like, yes, it was, in the sense that God doesn't hold that against you, but also history can repeat itself if you don't, you know, have that awareness of where you've been.
100%.
Yeah, I think it's so funny. I'll just like tag on that for years. I mean, I remember I always take things in decades, like, you know, for 10 years and then the next, and then 20 years. Like you're always thinking, like you said, about the future and what's next, and you're excited. And I feel like once I hit 40, I started almost like going back. So maybe that's kind of like where my journey is right now, is because I'm like, wait, what I wanted to be, you know, an engineer. Why didn't I pursue that? Like what happened? And not in a bad way or not in a regret by any means, but there's something that I feel like in that reflection that brings that awareness, and then even sometimes that clarity. And not only when you're single, but even when you're married. And yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
So what would you all say, you know, for people who are single and believe in God to get married one day, and they do hold marriage in this, you know, the sacred light and perspective of something that they feel, you know, is a gift that they want? What would you say for them if they were like, hey, I really want to get married, but I feel like I have no options or control or whatever the case is? Do you feel like there's an opportunity in singleness that maybe, or you can even call it an advantage, and, you know, an advantage, an opportunity in singleness that maybe, since you all have been married for 17 years, that you notice that, hey, I can't do that because I'm married, or it's a lot harder to do this in marriage?
Yeah, man, that is so layered. And I think when I do wedding ceremonies, I'm a wedding officiant, and one of the things that I do through preparation for the ceremony is we always talk in our premarital coaching about, you guys are entering into a really sacred time of you know, engagement and getting ready for marriage, and that's all just wonderful. It's great. It's fantastic. Cultivate curiosity, all these other things. But a lot of my ceremonies, I'll talk about Paul's admonition is for everybody to stay single.
Yeah.
That's the primary position. That's not the fallback. That's the primary position.
Wow.
So he's saying, and there may be some dispute on whether he was alluding back to, look, Christ was single, I'm single, therefore you should be single, but because you're weak, okay, that's why you're going to get married. Don't burn, kind of thing. And I think that we've used that in a negative sense. And I want to say, no, this is positive for you. That embrace, even though you're engaged, you're still an individual. But now you're an individual with somebody. So I was an individual. My name was Scott, and I'm an individual with Emily, but we were together. And so now what ends up happening is in our engagement process and our dating and early marriage, I couldn't just leave. I had to say, hey, I'm going to go see a movie, or hey, I'm going to go out to dinner with friends, or I'm going to do this. When I was single, I didn't have to check in with anybody. I didn't have to worry about, if I wanted to travel, I could just book a plane ticket and travel. And then when you add kids into that mix, now it's compounded, and not in a negative sense. It's just there's more responsibility for you. None of that's a bad thing. It's just, it just changes the equation a little bit. 1 + 1 = 2. Well, now you're 2 + 2 = 4, and now you're 2 + 3. You know, so you're just changing the math a little bit. I'm going to pull my wife's love language, which is math. But
I've never heard
yeah,
that.
so in my perspective, I think it's just that sense of, is being single better than? No, it's just different. But it's in the way that it's different is your responsibilities are different. So when you're married, my responsibility is to love my wife as Christ loves the church. When I'm single, my responsibility is to live my life in accord, and I do that when I'm married too, but especially when I'm single, my goal is to live my life in accordance with the principles and the ethics and everything of of the Bible. And it's a little easier to do when it's just me. Like all I have to do is make sure, hey, Paul's admonition is everything you do unto the Lord. So I'm going to go and I'm going to, if I push a broom, I'm going to push that broom as best I can. And I'm going to give in that. But when I'm married, I can't just push a broom because I have a wife to take care of. So now responsibility increases. It's not a bad thing. It's just different. And I think that we tend to elevate marriage in the Christian context. I dare say I almost idolatrous in some sense.
Oh, 100%.
Okay, I'm going to say
worth
and it's idolatrous.
Up and being selected by somebody.
Yes, like we talk about it with the language of the one, and you found your one, and I'm just like blah. And I think all of that's just very dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is because what that does is it automatically, by default, devalues your singleness.
Or even asking people, why are you still single?
Yes. Oh my God. It's like asking somebody at a funeral, do you miss them? I mean, honestly, it's painful because you don't know where that other person is. In that journey. Maybe they love being single. Maybe they just got out of a relationship that they were in that they thought was going to lead towards marriage and it didn't. And then you come up with that question. And so I want to challenge all of us to be a little more sensitive to the fact that God's calling on your life is God's calling on your life. If that means that for this season you're single, then I would learn how to cultivate hope. Not hope in being married, but hope in Christ. Because whether you're married or not, God loves you, God will use you, God will orchestrate your life to bring glory to his name. It changes when you're married because now I can't just pick up and move across country like that. It takes time. It takes, there's certain things. So that's what I would say. That's my take on that.
That's really good. We could stop the podcast right here. Like that.
I don't know about that, but
the one I don't know if you were going to say something, Tim, but I as Scott was talking, one thing that kind of popped into my head, and I know I heard this somewhere, I just don't remember where, but especially for those who are Christian or even not Christian, but serving is an opportunity that when you're single, you have the ability to be able to serve. And that might be in church. It might be just serving your friends. It might be serving your parents. It might be serving in different capacities. And it's not that you can't do that when you're married, but I bring that up specifically because that's a character formation. And so I think that there's a lot that can be developed from a character perspective that then translates into marriage and the rest of your life. So there are things that pop up now that I'm having to develop from a character perspective because my son is my mirror and called me out on it. And I'm like, oh man, I do that. Like, where'd you get that? Oh, that's me. So now I'm going to deal with my stuff and parent at the same time. So it's good if you can have kind of going back to that community, like people that are challenging you to really grow from like a character perspective, because we're never going to be perfect. Right. So that's always it's progress. It's not perfection by any means, but I do think that there can be, and again, it goes back to the self-awareness, but there can be things that happen when you're single that are going to help you when you're dating or when you're married.
I agree 100%. 100%. Like that is definitely important.
I love that because I think one of the motivations for people serving or being generous, honestly, is the heart I think that you can cultivate, when you are serving anybody. But a lot of times people do things with the wrong motives of I want to do this so that I can be ready for marriage. Let's do things because we want to be reflective of Christ, because we want to be Christ-like. Because, I mean, Scott, one of the things that you had kind of, I pulled out from what your response you just gave was choose your heart, being single is hard, being married is hard. of course there's a joy in having children and having a spouse, and like, yes, absolutely, but also there's a lot of work that goes into it, that people may know, or maybe they don't know. And even if you do know, you don't ever know until you get into it. Like, I was just telling Tim that, like, I'm so thankful for our marriage, and it's work, but also a lot of the things that have happened or that we've experienced, learned about each other, you never knew those things. So you don't know what you're saying yes to when you get married. And it's like, it's kind of scary. Like, I get it when people are like, nah, like, I'm not down for that. You know, I'm like, respect. At least and it's the same way I respect people who are like, I'm too selfish to have kids, because it's better for you to not bring a child into this world if you're not going to, you know, take care of them the way they need to be taken care of. You know, there's so many kids who are in orphanages and who are in foster and all those things. But I just think it's like, it's so important to recognize the responsibility and realizing that, like, in your singleness, if you have a hard time serving and giving and looking out for other people, and also getting to know yourself and looking in the mirror, marriage is going to be like just 10 times harder than it needs to be. It's going to be hard no matter what, because it's two simple people. But I think that that's just such an awesome call out, or something to highlight. And I think that's something that we kind of romanticize, you know, the marriage and the selection, and like, oh, I got a ring and like whatever. And it's like, okay, like, that's great. You said yes to this person. What are you saying no to?
Yeah.
That's good.
And that's been such a harsh realization even in parenting, right? And it's like, yeah, my friendships don't look the same way that you know they looked before, and it's okay. You know, it's a healthy thing. You can't take on responsibility of being married and even being in a dating relationship without dropping something else. But a lot of times we have to ask ourselves, are our plates full as a single person, or are we just kind of like sitting and diddly-daddling and waiting for someone to come along?
Yeah. Knowing what you know now about your marriage, how it started, what's maybe one thing you would have done differently when you two were dating, whether it's individually or just something you two would have done together? What's one thing you would have done differently or changed about your dating time?
Man.
Everything. No,
only one thing.
This one. I'm gonna be the gentleman, and I'm gonna defer to Emily on this part of this one, since I've started the last couple.
And I'm gonna go way, way vulnerable. I would say boundaries, like being much clearer on boundaries, expectations, especially when it comes to the physical, because that was just something that we struggled with. And so just to be transparent, I think that then bled into our marriage. And, you know, we can talk about that later, but that's the one thing that I would say if I could look back.
Yeah. Sorry, I have to pause there, unless you're going to touch more on that, just because obviously you all know we talk to a lot of people who are dating, who are single, and we find that that's one of the biggest issues as well. And honestly, that was a struggle for something in our relationship, was boundaries, especially early on. We got much better after a while, but
after we failed a lot.
A lot of people struggle with boundaries. What does that look like to somebody that's dating right now? What would you say, like, hey, have this conversation, do this action? Like, what does it look like to get boundaries right?
Or even, how do you know that you need to reassess your boundaries?
Well, I think it goes back to your first question of knowing yourself. So first you have to kind of know, like, my boundary might look different than, you know, Scott's, and then being honest about it. So if I was like, you know, okay, I could not hang out after a movie, then we needed to not even put ourselves in the position to watch a movie, because I would know what would happen after the movie. And so that would probably be the biggest thing for me, is just knowing your own self and what is kind of that trigger, that excitement that, you know, you want to spend time or take it to the next level, or whatever that looks like for the couple or the individual. And then again, just being honest about it. I think sometimes people hold back and they're afraid, or at least maybe I did. I'll speak about myself, that, you know, like, oh, if I say this, then he's not going to like me as much, kind of going back to the people pleaser thing, which in all reality is not true. So.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, I'll jump in and I'll just double down on the vulnerability piece and the transparency piece.
We love it.
Yeah, well,
You're gonna get it with the
you're gonna
Holdens.
get it. You're gonna get it because I would even say the boundaries piece, of course, the self-awareness and the knowledge of self piece, absolutely. But I think how I would kind of multiply those or kind of double down on them in a sense of for us it was we made choices to not have boundaries. We made choices to have sex before marriage and then we justified it. And I think for us, it was, I don't even know if it was it wasn't like a rebellion against anything. I think it was just we loved each other and we hadn't dealt with some of the baggage prior to our marriage, prior to our dating. And that we brought that in, which if we go back to what Emily said about being in a constant relationship, you're never unpacking the last person you dated. You're bringing that person in.
Yeah.
And Paul's really clear when he talks about sex is the only sin that we kind of retain in our body kind of thing,
against ourselves.
And I think for us, what ended up happening was we had so diluted the boundaries and so diluted the perceptions of everything, which then I think bled into how we saw God. That what it did for us is it just left us wanting more. And so I would say, how do we, if I was sitting across from somebody in our coaching and we were having this conversation, it would be something like, you said this, when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. When you say yes to, sex outside of marriage, sex outside of covenant, there's a price.
Wow.
That price isn't like, there's no transactional account here.
Right.
Like, I don't give you 20, you give me 30 or anything like that. But it's a transaction nonetheless. And I'm giving a piece of me away.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, I married the woman I loved, but the price we paid for that was we didn't understand intimacy.
Yeah.
The language that we spoke around intimacy was always sexual connection, not connection that can lead to sexual connection or something like that. And so our intimacy language got screwed up a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, is God a God of redemption?
Yes.
100%.
That is very much our story.
Did we make some mistakes? Yes. Has God been good to us? 100%.
Right.
But if you're listening to this today, whether this is next week, next year, 10 years from now, the question you got to ask yourself is, if you really love this person, then your response to that person is to put their needs first, not yours. Because sex outside of marriage is about me. I don't care how you want to spin it. It's about me. It's meeting my needs, my sexual needs. Now, you might get something as well, but let's be honest. It's about me. And when I come into the covenant of marriage, it's we.
Yeah.
And sex takes on a different connotation in that moment. Now, it might be hot and heavy. It might be a quickie. It might be all these other things. And all of that's the same outside of the context of marriage. But the primary driver outside of marriage is, what are you giving me?
Yeah.
What are you doing for me? And the subtle shift, which isn't really so subtle, is when I say I do, and I enter that covenant relationship. I always tell people in the marriage, nothing magical happens when you say I do. But everything magical happens when you say I do. And it's amazing. Like you cannot put it into words. Like you guys were there. You remember prior to, like nothing changed. Like the sun didn't stand still and
Right.
lightning didn't flash across the sky. But something shifted internally for you guys when you said I do. Respect became differently. Now there's a covenant. Now it's like I can't not be with her. And the deeper you get into that relationship, the deeper you get into that friendship with one another, sex takes on even a deeper meaning. There's no context for that depth of sex, that depth of intimacy outside of the marriage covenant. And so the transaction is, what does it cost you? It might not feel like it's costing you anything, but a piece of you goes with that other person every time. And guess what? You get a piece of them. And that person is coming with you and that other person, and you just layer that. And if you've had, maybe it's just one relationship outside of marriage, maybe it's with the same person and then you got married. But let's be honest. People are having multiple sexual partners before marriage, and you're bringing every one of them into a relationship. How did that hurt us? When we were intimate with one another, there was some self insecurities for her and me. Like, am I performing right? Is he thinking about somebody else? So that's where I would say, why are boundaries important and how do you strengthen those? Start first with, why am I doing this? And if you can't stop, then that's another equation. That's another question. And that's probably where some professional help needs to come in, because now it's a little bit more of an addictive thing and stuff like that. So.
Oh,
so
good. Scott, no, seriously. That, first of all, thank you both for being transparent, being vulnerable, because honestly, these are the types of conversations that unfortunately so many single people, so many people that are dating, so many people who are married don't get to hear, they're not exposed to. And for a lot of reasons, people are ashamed of it. People haven't fully healed from it. So I just want to thank you for that. And second, I want to go deeper on something that you said, because as much as we love God and we try our best to honor him on this podcast, we love to be practical as well, because sometimes when you're
practical.
Yes, but sometimes when we are in the space of giving Christian dating advice, it can be way spiritual and not enough practical.
Right.
So you said something, and I may be getting the language off a little bit, but you said something about emotional connection versus sexual connection when you were dating. Can you go deeper there? Because I'm sure there's somebody who listened to this right now and they're like, yeah, that's cool, but I still gonna have sex before marriage.
Well, because a lot of people say that's how I express my love for the person.
So can you break that down more for us? Like, let's get real practical. What does it look like to connect with somebody in an intimate way, but it's not sexual? And why is that beneficial?
Well,
that's the glue.
It's the glue. And I want to take one step back, and I'll tie this all together. And this is both genders. I think that we live in a world saturated with pornographic images. And that changes the intimacy question and equation drastically. Because now intimacy becomes detached, even more layers than before. Because now we equate orgasm or whatever as intimacy. And what we have to realize is that intimacy at its key is just vulnerability, emotional vulnerability with that person sitting across the table from you, or in the same bed with you. So I can be intimate. I can have intimate relationships that are same-sex relationships. Like, I have friends that know everything about me. Like, I am in contact with them constantly. Like, hey, how are you doing? And they're able to come back and say, how are you doing? Because I saw your post on Instagram and it looks like there's something a little off, because I know you don't normally do that. So for us, and I'll take a step back. I don't know if that was a little off topic, and I can clean that up a little bit, but I think that really for us, the language of intimacy and the acts of intimacy are and Emily said it, the glue that holds everything together. So I'll give it, I don't want to jump in.
No, you're fine. You go and I'll.
So here's a, for instance, here's just, you want to get practical. Here's practical. This is our marriage. So I'm a work from home dad. I work from home. Now, Emily works from home too. She's in the basement, but she travels. She's in the basement. That sounds so awful. I put her in the basement, you know. Her office is in the basement, so she's able to concentrate.
Work from home is the best, by the way.
Kitchen table, yeah. I know, that is so bad. And I got into a place earlier this year where I thought the things I do for this family. So every morning I get the boys ready for school. I make a smoothie for my wife. I make their.
I know. Hold on. Oh my goodness.
Smoothie. I'm like, okay.
There's so many women right now. Like, Lord, please send me a snack. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It is. And I'll tell you, so for me, that's a love language.
It is.
Acts of service and really just serving the people that I love. And if you know me at all, you know I love to serve. I love to be of service. I love to lift people up and enable and empower. And that's what I do. And I look at that as for my family, that's what I do. And so Emily works in the morning. She'll wake up early, do her quiet time, and then she'll get an hour or two into work. And then she'll come up and we'll get the boys off and we'll pray together as a family and stuff like that. Well, I was thinking that's intimacy points. Like these things I'm doing are intimacy points. And there was no reward at the end. You know what I mean? And now I'm getting frustrated because her intimacy language is touch. Her intimacy language is back rubs.
Oh yeah.
That don't necessarily lead to sex.
Right.
To kisses in the morning, to just when she's having a rough day, just holding her. Just give her a hug. Allow her to cry or whatever. Or give her a hug and then allow her to vent. But it was a touch thing. It was a very much of a tactile thing. So I'm sitting here thinking we're speaking the same language. I'm speaking French and she's speaking German. And I'm wondering why we're missing the boat. Yeah. And what I came to realize is that we have different ideas of what intimacy is. Yeah. So my ideas of intimacy were directly and negatively influenced by years of porn addiction.
Yeah.
And so I thought intimacy was the act of sex. I thought intimacy was every time I touched my wife, it had to lead to, and that's just my immaturity. Yeah. That's just my immaturity. That's me having to work through my stuff. That's my lack of self-awareness. And that caused problems in our marriage.
And lack of communication around it. Right.
Yeah.
So the assumptions.
There you go.
The assumption then led to, oh, this is what's going to happen. No, like you never asked me.
Yeah.
Like
that back rub was for free.
Yep, I know, right? Yeah.
You just had to voice this or talk.
Yeah. And so intimacy is a connection. And you said this, and you said, "Hey, I'm still going to have sex outside of marriage. I don't care." Here's the deal: give yourself 6 months. Don't have sex. 6 months.
Somebody just passed out.
I know, right?
Like
months. I can go 6 hours, 6 days. Give 6 months, okay? Because it's going to take you 3 months to detox.
Yeah.
Okay. And then once you're through that detox place, so that means no porn, no masturbation, no sex. Okay. That means you're going to have to dig into relationships. And what's going to happen is 3 months in, you're going to detox. You're going to feel the willies. You're going to shake a little bit.
Yeah.
Do some therapy, get a coach, find a good coach, find a mentor, find a pastor, whatever. But commit to 6 months. You're not going to die. I promise. Okay. From that 3 to 6 month period, once you're through the detox, now you're going to be doing this all the way through. From the 3 to the 6 month period, focus on emotional connection. Now, what does that mean? Because that's a $3 word in a $1.50 conversation. Okay. Here's what emotional connection is: being vulnerable, being present. So this great bane of our existence, go out to lunch and put it away.
Yeah.
Put it on silent. From 9 to 10, if you go to bed at 10 o'clock, from 9 to 10, your phone's off. Put it in your bedroom, take an hour off, detach from it. limit your social media intake. Maybe unload from your phone. Don't have any access to anything that would lead towards this. And then go out a lot with your friends and have deep, meaningful conversations. Not the, hey, who's going to win the football game this week? But hey, you know what? I like football, and this is where I really like football. I like football because of this. And you're exposing your heart a little bit more each time. Now, all the guys that are listening to me right now said, yeah, that's not going to happen. Because here's what happens. You get together and let's say you have 10 friends and they're all married. Okay. I don't mean to be, this is not a sexist. It's just statistically, this is what happens. And they've actually done research studies on this. The 5 wives are going to get together and they're going to start to talk about life and their loves and their hates and their everything that's been going on. And, little Jimmy's done this and little Sally's doing this, or, my mom said this and my dad said this, and the guys are going to go turn on the football game. And I know I'm doing a broad stereotype here, but bear with me. And then what's going to happen is when you get together with your spouse is going to say, oh man, I am so relieved at how, Jim is doing since his leg got amputated. Jim sat right next to you and you didn't even know he got his leg amputated. It's not because you don't care about Jim. It's because conversations for men are different than they are for women. So intimacy, deep, meaningful, vulnerable conversations look different for men. So we have to really be intentional about it. Can it happen? Yes. And it does happen. But you have to be intentional about it. So you have to set aside time with those 5, 6 guys, and you have to dig deep to say, man, I'm scared. Like I lost my job last week, or I don't like my job. I need to find something new, but I'm afraid. Like I really feel like God's calling me to this, or I feel like God's calling me to full-time ministry. And you're just pouring your heart out. That doesn't mean you have to be like unhealthy in your vulnerability. You don't have to share everything with everybody, but you got to have those 5 or 6 people. And if you do that, 6 months, no sex, no masturbation, no porn, no nothing like that. Take lots of cold showers if you need them, take cold baths, whatever you need to do. At the end of that 6 months, honestly, and this is where self-awareness comes in, have an honest conversation with yourself. Were my connections with members of the opposite sex better or worse than when I was having sex with them? If it's worse, come back at me, because I will almost guarantee, and I don't give guarantees, but I will almost guarantee you, if you do it even half right, with the intention of building depth, 10 of those relationships, 8 of them will be deeper. And if 8 of those are male, or if 10 of those relationships are there and 8 are better, at least 3 of those are female friends and they are better. Now, what do you do with that? Now you're faced with a true choice, because now you know the difference between false intimacy, which is sex, and true intimacy, which is connection at the level of the heart. Once you get that heart connection, it's really tough to go back. Doesn't mean you won't. It's just really tough, because now you know the difference between a counterfeit and false intimacy and true intimacy.
So good.
I'm not practical enough for you.
That was definitely practical, and I think it's definitely challenging for someone to really consider to do it, because like you said, once you connect with somebody on that deep level, you're not going to want to go back to the superficial level, because it's just like, once you all taste the steak, did you really want a pork chop? Like, did you really like?
I've tasted and seen.
Right. So that's so good. Emily, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that. If not, it's totally fine, because Scott laid it down. But I just wanted to make sure.
The only other thing that I was thinking of, because we follow Gottman Institute quite a bit, they talk a lot about turning toward, and And for me, like that is an emotional, intimate connection. And what that means is Scott was, making a smoothie, but I'm like focused on work and something else. And so there was never an emotional turning toward, and because I'm focused on being busy instead of pausing and thanking him and doing some of those things that don't seem like they're a big deal, but when you start to do them over and over again, they do become a big deal, because then they lead to the deeper emotional and then eventually even sexual intimacy as well. So I think just if you feel like if you're in a dating relationship and you feel like you're missing like that emotional connected part, you have to kind of ask yourself, like, am I pausing? Am I focused? Am I, really hearing the other person, seeing the other person? Because that might be something that you just need to slow down sometimes.
Yeah, because sex is easy. Sex is easy. Conversation's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be present.
We go to sex because I don't have to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to have a talk with you. I don't have to have depth with you.
Right.
And here's my challenge to both men and women is we tend to go to sex when we have a very low value of ourselves. The lower the opinion, the quicker to bed.
Or you start with sex.
Yeah. So learn how to raise your opinion of yourself. And we do that through self-awareness. What are your values? Maybe get some therapy, dig deeper into prayer, meditation, work out.
Yeah.
Get in the gym, not with the ulterior motive of wanting to get a six pack or whatever, but with the ulterior motive of just working on myself.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't for you, this is for me.
I feel better.
Yeah, I just feel better about myself. The endorphins rush, the dopamine goes, whatever. But yeah, the lower our esteem for ourselves, the quicker we'll turn towards sex. And that's
so good.
That's not
good.
Yeah.
So good. Because I think what a lot of times the world has twisted the narrative to tell us, like, oh, well, if you, especially for guys, like, oh, what's your body count? Like, how many girls can you get in bed with you? Especially when you're younger, like high school, college. But I mean, I'm more so definitely, the longer you're single, kind of that idea, even going back to the question, or why are you still single? As if like it means you're like smelly or like something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, and that was my story. It was like I chose to be single for several years. It wasn't because I couldn't get anybody to be interested in me. It's because this is a sacred, special time that I want to focus on myself and grow. But I think that, a lot of times sex is kind of viewed as like, oh, if you are attractive in this way. And even Scott, you were talking about, the porn industry and how much that has had an effect on how we view intimacy. And it's honestly reduced intimacy down to like a sexual encounter. And that's of course not true. And even for those of you who do want to get married, and even some people view like, oh, well, me and my boyfriend have sex, that means we're going to be good together in marriage. Like we do, or people who use sex as like a trial, like an interview, audition, whatever the term is, like, oh, well, I want to kind of see how this is going to be like. That's why we're living together. That's why we're, why we, we share our bank account, why we do all these things that married people do to kind of like test out the waters. But, it's so funny when people talk about marriage in that way, because you can't talk about any other covenant relationship in that way. Like you can't say, oh, I want to be a parent, let me just borrow your kid, test this out. Either you're in or you're out. Like it's you're here or you're not. Like there's no testing it out. Like you don't, high school in a way prepares you for college as much as it can, but high school is not college. It's not. And I just think that it's such the beginning of freedom. What you all are sharing is like the beginning of freedom is really identifying lies and asking yourself those hard questions. Stop running from yourself. And I think that's, it's displayed in the story with Adam, with like God asking Adam, like, where are you? And it's not because God didn't know, it's because Adam didn't know, or he didn't want to be honest with himself. I think that's like the beginning of sin of, well, that literally is the beginning of sin, but it's the beginning of sin for all of us as well. It's like, as you both beautifully stated, like, ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? Or why did I do that? And it does leak into marriage so much. And like, y'all can share even better than us, but like most of the time when you're married, even if you're in a season of your life where like sex is great, you're having sex like maybe 10% of the time, like if you're lucky. Like it really doesn't, just like Scott, you said, sex is quick, it's easy. And that's why you can literally meet somebody online tonight and go have sex in minutes, but you cannot have a good quality conversation with somebody very, very quickly. And I think that like that emotional intimacy is something that is so undervalued, because it is something maybe that's complicated. It's something that honestly we haven't seen demonstrated, or like we haven't seen a good example of it, whether it is like in the homes we grew up in or just the communities we're a part of, or whatever the case is. But we know sex because it's so readily available, because it's in culture, because porn is literally right in your pocket. Like it's so easy to just go to what you know. But hopefully, people listening can kind of say, hey, I want to challenge myself. Even though I know I love God and I consider this a Christian relationship, but we are having sex and I'm comfortable with it, but challenge yourself to go a little bit more, to go a little bit deeper. Like, will God forgive you? Absolutely. He's already forgiven you. And you guys may get married, because I know some of the questions like, oh, can we still get married if we have sex? Yeah, you absolutely can. That's not like, and we're not saying you guys aren't meant for each other or anything like that if you have, been in sin or whatever. But also you have to ask yourself, like, what type of person do I want to be? And what type of relationship and marriage do I want to have? Do I want to have one that's, you don't marry people because, maybe you do marry someone because they're good at the sex, but that's not what keeps you married. People don't marry because the sex is horrible. It's usually because that emotional intimacy isn't there, because the friendship isn't there, that connection isn't there. And that is what sustains you through hard times. But Scott, to your point, I think that friendship is something so underrated in community. And like that's, as a single person, you have an opportunity to practice that. And I don't want to say practice in the sense of like, oh, I'm practicing for the game, like for the real thing. Like practice it in the sense of building your skill. Like this is something you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. You're practicing friendship, emotional intimacy, whether you're married for, 5 years, 40 years, 80 years, whatever the case is. Like it's like someone who's a doctor. You're practicing medicine for your entire career. You never stop learning. So I just love that. And I think that hopefully everybody listening can hear the hope in Scott Emily's story. Like, hey, if you did mess up, and Tim and I messed up as well, before we married each other, we had to adjust our boundaries while we were dating as well. But it's something that we're always growing in, is that conversation and that self-awareness.
Yeah. This has been really good. I wanted to get to marriage, but honestly, I don't anymore, because I think we need to leave it where it is in regards to really just focusing on a singleness, focusing on yourself. And we can do a part 2 one day and really go into marriage, because I think that'd be great. But I think there was so much good here that I don't even, like you said, sometimes we focus too much on marriage. Right now, this episode really needs to be about yourself. Even if you're dating, like you need to evaluate where you are currently at the moment. So that's so good. Any last thoughts, Scott and Emily? Anything you want to share that you're like, look, I really want to get this across to somebody?
Well, we're going to be here another hour, but I won't do that. There's 2 things that come to mind. And one ties back to the conversation we just had. Ask yourself at the end of a sexual encounter, am I more fulfilled or more empty? And this is and I think our culture skews us towards deception, self-deception. No, I feel great. But then I go and I have a drink, or I go and smoke a joint, or I go and find another sexual partner. Because we have never been culturally as lonely as we are right now as a culture. And we satiate that loneliness with junk food. And the junk food is sex outside of marriage. And all that does is leave us wanting more. And so we have to have more sex. And then porn addiction comes in, and then it just becomes this it's a self-destructive pattern. And I think that you just have to ask yourself really honest questions. And, you know, one of my favorite philosophers, Blaise Pascal, says there's nothing that sitting in silence in an empty room for 5 minutes won't cure. Because most of humanity couldn't sit in silence for 5 minutes.
Wow.
No talking, no cell phones, no music, no TV, just silence in a room for 5 minutes. No movement, no nothing for 5 minutes. Try it. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Just 5 minutes. Set an alarm. 5 minutes. Put the phone across the room. 5 minutes. The reason we can't do that is because we are so unsettled internally. Goes back to the self-awareness piece. So just be honest with yourself. You gotta. Another one of my favorite philosophers, his name is David Goggins. He's a Navy SEAL. Some of you, as I just mentioned that, you're going to know who he is. He's a Navy SEAL. He's the only person in the United States military who's qualified for all 4 branches of special forces. He's just a machine. But one of the
very foul mouth.
He's very foul mouth. So, but
just forewarning.
Just forewarning. But his philosophy is great, and his philosophy is if you can't be honest with yourself first, then everything else will fail. So you can sit here and say all you want. Tim, you mentioned it. Well, I'm still going to have premarital sex. Great. Why?
Yeah.
Ask yourself the question, why? Why are you going to have premarital sex?
Yeah.
And then when you answered that why, so because I want to, well, why? Why do you want to? Because it makes me feel good about myself. Why does it make you feel good about yourself? And we call this exercise the 7 whys. So once you get to that 7th why, and you most likely you won't even get to 7, but if you get to 7, now you've just narrowed that down to the brass tack, to the bare minimum. And now what you realize is I have sex because I'm lonely. Well, that's a different equation.
Yep.
So now I can find other ways to satisfy my loneliness, because loneliness is a definition that I bring to the equation. It's not something that's given to me. It's my own evaluation of the relationships around me. So I can be in a room full of people and feel lonely. Why? Because nobody knows me. No, because you don't know yourself. Because you've never asked yourself the hard questions. So that's what I would say. So
good.
Emily?
Oh my gosh. There were a couple different thoughts that I was going to add, but I think the biggest thing that I want to close with is all of the things. I know that Tim, you said we wanted to focus on marriage, to talk about marriage, but we're going to stick with this. All these things we've talked about are things that we still do.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think it's just the reminder that it's just that we apply them differently. We're just in a different stage of life, or we're constantly getting to know ourselves. Like, we have family values and a vision statement, but we're constantly looking at it every year to say, like, is this still aligned? Is this still who we are? And so I think it's just one of those things where sometimes in culture, like especially in dating relationship, you're like, okay, if I do this, this, and this, then I'm ready.
Right.
No, like you're going to continually do these things that we've talked about. And when you first get married, your husband's going to like cause some things to come up you're going to have to deal with and work through. And then guess what? When you have kids, they're going to bring up even more stuff that you're going to have to continue to work through. But that's also where the beauty is.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's something so amazing when you get to those places of connection and those places of being honest that are freeing in a sense. So I just want to leave people with hope.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
hope from our own journey.
Oh my God, yes.
And hope that like, look, like we make decisions, we do our best to make the best choices, and we screw up all the time, and that's totally fine because there's a lot of grace.
A lot of grace.
So,
yep, 100%.
Yeah, no, that's so good. You all have given so much value today, and I'm sure some people are like, okay, I need to stay connected with Scott and Emily. So can you let them know, and we'll put everything in the show notes in the description. But can you let people know where they can connect with you, where they can find your resources, all of that good stuff?
Yeah. So I think on Instagram, it's at projectrootsandwings.com or at Scott A. Holden. It's been a while since I've even liked myself, but you can find me at projectrootsandwings.com, and then you can find my personal IG page from there. And then our website is projectrootsandwings.com. And that's really the best way to get in touch with us is through those avenues, or you can send me an email at scott@projectrootsandwings.com.
We're excited. Definitely follow them. Check out their resources, because if you thought this was good, this is just scratching the surface.
Yeah,
There's
check out
so
their podcast.
much
Thank you.
more. We'll see you next week on Duddy Podcast.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this video.
To get more Christian relationship advice, subscribe to our channel.
And make sure you check out our other videos as well.